Federalist 85, Part 2. At this point, 7 of the 13 states had already ratified the Constitution. So Hamilton begins the essay by saying, according to the formal division of the subject of these papers announced in my first number, there would appear still to remain for discussion 2 points: the analogy of the proposed government to your own state constitution, and the additional security which its adoption will afford to republican government, to liberty, and to property. But these heads have been so fully anticipated and exhausted in the progress of the work that it would now scarcely be possible to do anything more than repeat in a more dilated form what has been heretofore said, which the advanced stage of the question and the time already spent upon it conspire to forbid. The 2 categories he mentions, he says we've already talked so much about it in these last 84 papers that we might not want to spend any more time on it. And this government that we're trying to establish for you, it'll protect your liberty and also your property. Now remember, the books that I've mentioned throughout these readings, definitely take a look at those, because they look at different angles of what was going on back then. Make sure you watch the lectures of the professors I have mentioned. It is remarkable that the resemblance of the plan of the convention to the act which organizes the government of this state holds, not less with regard to many of the supposed defects than to the real excellencies of the former. Among the pretended defects are the re-eligibility of the executive, the want of a council, the omission of a formal Bill of Rights, the omission of a provision respecting the liberty of the press. These and several others, which have been noted in the course of our inquiries, are as much chargeable on the existing constitution of this state as on the one proposed for the Union. And a man must have slender pretensions to consistency who can rail at the latter for imperfections which he finds no difficulty in excusing in the former. Nor indeed can there be a better proof of the insincerity and affectation of some of the zealous adversaries of the plan of the convention among us, who profess to be devoted admirers of the government under which they live, than the fury with which they have attacked that plan for matters in regard to which our own Constitution is equally or perhaps more vulnerable. Remember, we talked about this. Hamilton keeps on saying, look at these hypocrites who are criticizing the Constitution, the federal Constitution that we're proposing to you, but everything that's similar to it, that is in our own state constitution or in their own state constitutions, they're okay with it. So they become zealots and criticize us over minor things, but they overlook the same issues in their own state constitutions. So again, he's trying to say you can't read everything these anti-federalists, these critics of ours are saying to be true or fully factual. They're probably half-truths. The next paragraph, the additional securities to Republican government, to liberty and to property to be derived from the adoption of the plan under consideration consist chiefly in the restraints which the preservation of the Union will impose on local factions and insurrections, and on the ambition of powerful individuals in single states who might acquire credit and influence enough from leaders and favorites to become the despots of the people. In the diminution of the opportunities to foreign intrigue, which the dissolution of the Confederacy would invite and facilitate, in the prevention of extensive military establishments, which could not fail to grow out of wars between the states in a disunited situation, in the express guarantee of a republican form of government to each, in the absolute and universal exclusion of titles of nobility, and in the precautions against the repetition of those practices on the part of the state governments which have undermined the foundations of property and credit, have planted mutual distrust in the breasts of all classes of citizens, and have occasioned an almost universal prostration of morals. He's referring here to some of the strengths in the new federal constitution and what led to the writing of it, when he says these states were undermining our credit and damaging the trust that people had. He's referring to, as we've talked about it before, the states issuing paper money that would become worthless, and were doing stuff where people were losing their faith in their state governments, in their currency, in their economy, in future investment. So he says, we see what catastrophic policies these states had implemented during this past few years. And if we hadn't checked it, and if we hadn't written this new constitution, there's a good chance that we would have probably united into confederations. We would have become 3 or 4 confederations, and we would have, without any doubt, we would be in wars. Or if we do not unite now, we will be in wars pretty soon. Thus have I, my fellow citizens, executed the task I had assigned to myself. With what success your conduct must determine. I trust at least you will admit that I have not failed in the assurance I gave you respecting the spirit with which my endeavors should be conducted. I have addressed myself purely to your judgments, and have studiously avoided those aperities which are too apt to disgrace political disputants of all parties, and which have been not a little provoked by the language and conduct of the opponents of the Constitution. The charge of a conspiracy against the liberties of the people, which has been indiscriminately brought against the advocates of the plan, has something in it too wanton and too malignant not to excite the indignation of every man who feels in his own bosom a refutation of the calumny. The perpetual changes which have been wrung upon the wealthy, the well-born, and the great have been such as to inspire the disgust of all sensible men, and the unwarrantable concealments and misrepresentations which have been in various ways practiced to keep the truth from the public eye have been of a nature to demand the reprobation of all honest men. It is not impossible that these circumstances may have occasionally betrayed me into intemperances of expression which I did not intend. It is certain that I have frequently felt a struggle between sensibility and moderation, and if the former has in some instances prevailed, It must be my excuse that it has been neither often nor much. So he apologizes for sometimes losing his cool because of all the ugly rhetoric that he says our critics have used. Now, keep in mind that a lot of these critics are saying that this is a constitution that is going to take care of the wealthy and really not be to the advantage of the not well-to-do, of all these small farmers and stuff. So I've mentioned books about the issue of creditor-debtors leading up to the Federal Convention. So make sure you look at some of those books, because what he's saying is not in a vacuum. People were pointing fingers that what you're writing here is only to the advantage of the powerful, the big landholders, the big merchants, the moneyed men, and not in the interest of the average American. And he's refuting that. Now, like I told you, you'll know more about Hamilton, the Federalist Papers, Madison, as you study the American history. Because within not too long from when he's writing these Federalists, he himself becomes the Secretary of Treasury, the first Secretary of Treasury of any importance. There was one guy Robert Morris, who was in charge of the finances of the country during the end of the war years and leading to the Federal Convention. So he's a big name too. But Hamilton, as far as the Department of Treasury goes, he becomes an important person in shaping it. So I'll stop here and we'll continue in the next video.